Now I can bring her on. We used to have the sweet intro. Where is the intro with the? I'll have that, I promise, for next week, because it's a regular segment that we do. We watch the planet, we watch the environment.
Stupid.
What's it? It's the planet, stupid.
The planet, stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, well done. She is our eco-journalist. She always tries to find the positive news in this grim world as we burn alive everything and everyone on this planet. But she finds somehow the good news in it all. She is eco-journalist Belinda Waymouth. Yeah.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning, my darling Belinda, with the most lovely voice and accent.
Thank you.
I know that there's a major climate conference going on. And there are a lot of ways to slice that. COP27, this UN summit, right?
Yes,
tell us the positive way to slice it, and then I, of course, will offer always the negative way to slice it. But you do think that there's some positives that came out, yes?
Well, here's the thing. This is the 27th Conference of the Parties. That's what COP stands for. And there has never been more at stake than there is right now. And, what we have to, what we're seeing everywhere, all over the world, here, Pakistan being, a third of the country being underwater for months of this year, things are very serious. And there's a very serious atmosphere at COP because there's so much at stake. And the big thing right now is the money. Where is the money going to come from to help developing nations who didn't put the carbon into the atmosphere but are really bearing the brunt of climate change? And so, what happens, with funding is going to be, the crucial part of COP27 and if it's a success or not. And the funding part has to be taken really seriously because otherwise there won't be trust moving forward. And the thing that happened, Paris, which was, 7 years ago, that COP was seen as huge because, the countries of the world agreed we had to keep the heating of the planet to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Everyone agreed on that. Yes. And it was this huge success. And then but the other thing that was agreed on then was that the developed countries of the world were going to be providing $100 billion in financial support to the developing countries of the world by 2020. Well, surprise, that didn't happen. Those monies, have not been paid out. There's been a little bit of it.
None of those monies have been paid out, or what do you mean when you say those monies have not been paid out? Like, really, that was all show and no go? Yeah.
There has not been $100 billion being provided, since 2020 to the developing countries of the world for the losses incurred from climate change damage, adaptation that they need, moving away from coastal areas, and then also the move to renewable energy. And so, the countries that are signing on and saying, yes, we have to do this, New Zealand, where I'm from, has said, we're going to give $20 million. Denmark, Belgium, France, Austria. But where are the big countries? Where's China? Where's the US in this? So there are three ways that we can help developing countries. One of them is with debt payment deferrals. And so one of the big players came in with their big thing this COP. The UK said, we're going to do climate resilient debt. They have this climate resilient debt clause, and it means that countries can stop their debt payments for 2 years if they've been hit by a climate disaster. So, okay, that's good. And then we have, so you've got the debt.
When they debt referrals, that means they don't have to pay it now.
Yeah. So the UK is saying, hey, we're going to give people, we're going to give countries a 2-year, window. They don't have to pay anything if they've been hit by a climate disaster. But what countries really need, and what these smaller countries that I just, named, the Denmark, Belgium, New Zealand, Scotland, France, Austria, they're talking about direct funds to developing countries, which is really what they want. Pakistan needs direct funds right now to, clean up and cope with the flooding that just happened. The third way, and I'm bringing this up because this is what the U.S. government has come in.
Before you bring up the third way, let me just get this straight. Well, the direct funds you're talking about, is that happening, or you're saying that the pledged money, for example, you mentioned Britain or UK, will they defer that, or are they actually going to try to target it to Pakistan, which needs the money now, for example?
Well, this is the thing. This is the $100 billion that was pledged that the developed world would provide for the developing world
Right.
by 2020. Every year there would be $100 billion put into the kitty by rich countries so that poorer countries, would be taken care of. And, this is the thing that I'm saying. This is just seen as such a crucial part of COP27 because, there'll be no trust if countries don't say, yes, we're going to help you. So yesterday, Wednesday, John Kerry, our, climate czar, he came riding in and he announced this thing called the Energy Transition Accelerator. And sounds great. But what this is all about carbon offsets. So this is the third way that the developed world can help the developing world, can help finance it. And the interesting thing about this is that this is about private sector money being used to help countries transition off coal, transition to renewable energy. And what the private sector get in return for providing this funding is they get carbon offsets. So that's a thing that we've talked about before. And some people are crazy about carbon offsets because what that allows people to do, allows these companies to do, is get offsets for their, polluting, dirty ways. Now, one of the things that I think is good about the Energy Transition Accelerator is that fossil fuel companies cannot put up any money and say, okay, this offsets our pollution. And so what it does is, you pay a country to, not deforest, to not take out its mangrove swamps, which are huge, carbon sequestration devices, and they also protect a coastal area from, storms. So you pay the money to maintain those ecosystems, and then, you get this, this carbon offset. And I think it's, as John Kerry said, look, I've been talking about the climate since, 1988, and it has to be all hands on deck. It has to be this many-pronged approach. There's not enough funds, countries don't have enough funds. We have to bring in the private sector. And this funding device is being developed with the Rockefeller Foundation and, wait for it, the Bezos Earth Fund.
Oh, the Bezos Earth Fund, of course.
Yeah, which, talking about the young millennial, who announced on, his win on Instagram. So, Bezos announced, on Instagram back in February of 2020 that he was going to be giving $10 billion to the planet for, the next 10 years. And that's just, those funds are just being released right now. There's almost $1 billion. What this, I think the thing is this Energy Transition Accelerator, in conjunction with all the other, mechanisms that we, that the world is talking about, putting in place, the idea is going in the right direction. And the idea is, provide trillions of dollars from the private sector to help countries transition off coal and to clean energy. But it's really, like how.
Well, I guess I'm really torn here between being encouraged by the fact that they are stepping up and the private sector is stepping up as well. I think I'd suggest to you that on balance, Jeff Bezos has a tremendous responsibility as a result of essentially being an outlaw as a polluter, with the the phoniness about recycling when it comes to the Amazon clutter.
Yeah.
And a business that successful with that kind of revenue, they can afford to really step up. So in a way, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have the money from anywhere to help with mitigating climate disasters and mitigating climate change. And but Bezos is doing a little bit of greenwashing with that, in my judgment. And more to the point, though, these governments, they must step up and actually not just, as you suggested, with a carbon offset, let themselves off the hook. It's not about buying your way out of it. You need to really change policy. I understand that's a slow process. Sadly, we can't have a slow process. There's an urgency in this entire thing that is quite intense.
Yeah, well, this is you hit the nail right on the head, Mark. I mean, this is go time. I mean, it's so serious what's happening right now. And I do think that these governments are really aware of it. And I think, the money thing is always going to be hard. I mean, the direct funds, which I think, they're more, what these countries need. Rich countries fear that they're going to be on the hook for huge amounts of compensation. And, obviously when everyone first started industrializing and burning coal, we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, there were, there were scientists who in the 1800s were saying we're going to change, the chemistry of the atmosphere with all this carbon dioxide. There was one scientist, I can't recall his name right now. And we have known for 50 plus years how, dangerous what we've been doing is, and the fossil fuel companies have known. I have to tell you one thing that is so wild. There are 600 fossil fuel lobbyists at COP27 this year.
That to me, yeah. So this isn't, again, yeah, go ahead.
25% more than they were at the last conference. I mean, it's so brazen, and they say there are more fossil fuel lobbyists at COP than there are. They outnumber the representatives from the hardest hit nations, of, the climate crisis. I mean, that to me is outrageous. And that's why I think we're still in this real sort of push me, pull you sort of, situation. I mean, my head spins when I read stuff like that, because on the one hand, we absolutely know what we have to do. We have to get off fossil fuels, and we have to do it now. And then, we have this entrenched, business model and energy system, but the writing is on the wall. We have to say goodbye to fossil fuels, and we have to do it ASAP. Well,
this is an important thing that Belinda has just noted, and we have to wrap up here, sadly, in another minute or two. But and then I want to, before we wrap up, just mention quickly, we'll just have like a minute to do it, what the Biden administration is doing. It's pretty big time, and it's pretty positive. So it's weird for me to note anything positive, but I will do that. Because I'm just so, when I say that, I know I kind of tease about that, but I'm just so dejected by what humanity is ignoring. It's such a broadside to this magical place that we inhabit along with others. And I don't mean to be too emotional about it, but I feel it very deeply. And I don't understand why. I mean, I understand why. It's money. And so to the money part, when Belinda talks about that there's 600 oil lobbyists at COP27, as countries try to shape policy about saving the planet, those oil lobbyists are not there to help shape policy that eliminates fossil fuels. They're there to help shape policy that will allow them to meet with minimum restrictions on development of fossil fuels and emissions in the years to come. 600 of them are there. So I think that's a really important point you've made, and I thank you. Can you just touch on the Biden administration quickly? There is big news out of the Biden administration on government contracts and how government contractors will be required to meet certain minimums when it comes to respecting climate goals.
Yeah, so I have to say, go Joe, because, this was going to be his number one issue if he hadn't had a pandemic and, social justice issues to focus on when he took office. But, as I've told you guys, the climate was his big thing. And he's really framing the climate crisis as an economic risk. And that's good because money talks. And the thing that he announced today, that the U.S. government, the federal supply chain is going to have to decarbonize. The U.S. government is the largest buyer of goods and services in the world. So the fact that he's saying, okay, you guys have to decarbonize and, you know, no ifs, ands, or buts. I think this is a really great way to start, because this is setting an example. You know, this is saying, like, you know, we, the government, have to do this. And we're this, you know, we have this huge supply chain. And, you know, it's bigger than what they're talking about doing with their 300,000 buildings, you know, decarbonizing them, you know, having an electric fleet. You know, this supply chain is huge. And then it gives him clout, as does what happened on, you know, November 8th, that we didn't get a red wave. We got more of a little pink trickle. But, you know, he's emboldened and you can see it. And he's, you know, going to be at COP27 tomorrow, and he's, you know, we've got the G20 meeting next week. He's having the first face-to-face with Xi Jinping since he became president. You know, they're going to be talking about the climate, and so I think that, you know, what he's doing is, you know, I mean, I'm all for it. You know, it is.
Well, when people talk about the parties, sorry to interrupt, we have to wrap up in a second, but when people talk about the parties being the same, I mean, I think increasingly that becomes a very difficult thing to defend. And I understand they're both beholden to money. And that's why you often hear the argument. They're both the same. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat. It really matters on issues, on a number of different issues. I mean, you just saw the overturning of Roe and all this sort of thing, a Supreme Court. But Supreme Court is also important from an environmental standpoint, and they're not environmentally friendly. And it's great to see a president at least take the initiative with this the newest way he can do it, which is to require these government contractors that, as you say, occupy a huge footprint in the American economy, require them to meet those same goals that he's laid out. And boy, COVID really threw us off, but I also think many of our goals probably we would have been short of, not only in this country, but elsewhere, even without COVID. I got to wrap up. I'm sorry, and it's so great to have you in.
Down to 5% battery.
If you go to the chat, you can see all the love you've gotten and also all the communications you've gotten. So I encourage you to go back and look at that. You can communicate with Belinda directly on social media at Belinda Waymouth, W-A-Y-M-O-U-T-H, W-A-Y-M-O-U-T-H. Belinda, thank you. More time next time.
My pleasure.
All right.
Bye,
We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.